Good afternoon, everybody. This is a very important topic, and Chris is here to help us with an update of this. It's a very special function for our society. Our expert committee is led by Chris Harman, and they perform a very important function which benefits all within our society. Their opinions of genuineness are much sought after by philatelists, by auctioneers, and by dealers. And they provide the society with an important source of income from huge voluntary efforts, which we should appreciate, all of us should appreciate. Now, the techniques used continue to develop, and with some of the equipment that they have now, they're at the very forefront of this development process. So Chris is here to explain to you the hows and the wherefores, about how the team operate, and provide some very good examples of what they are involved with. So Chris, over to you, sir.
Yes. What I'm going to run through today is something of the background to the expert committee, the way it works, the resources we have. But it's not all going to be admin, because actually I think it's probably more interesting to see some examples. So there's going to be a number of examples of some challenges, and I hope things of interest for people, because we constantly see, put it this way, we probably don't get the easy ones very often, and some of them do really take quite a lot of time and trouble. It's going to be, say, something of the background, something resources, and then some examples. And I thought I'd end up with a as with the USA, new stamps that have come in recently, the ones with the barcodes in the UK were forged within about 3 or 4 months of their original issue. The post office currently, I think, has about a dozen different forgeries of that, and I thought I'd show you some of those, because they're extremely deceptive. And if you bought one at a post office, I would doubt that you know you bought a bad one. So a little bit of background here. Obviously, I have given some updates over the years. We're now in Abchurch Lane, as we all know, and the expert committee has its own premises. This is quite important, because of course we're dealing with other people's material, and so it has to be kept really behind a locked door, so that if something does go missing, which it has done on occasion, not so much missing but mislaid, that at least we can know how far we've got to go to look. We spent quite a long time with the Queen when she opened the building, and in fact we borrowed a couple of her most famous stamps, probably the finest example in existence of the Western Australia 4-penny blue with the inverted frame, and a reasonably good example of the India 4 Annas inverted head, and we took them through their paces, and we took the Queen through sort of enlarged scans of what we had found out. In fact, she was chuckling away to herself, and she said, you know, I'm glad they turned out to be genuine. And I said, well, quite honestly, ma'am, if we hadn't believed they were genuine, we wouldn't have asked for them to borrow them. So anyway, so she was I think quite tickled at that. So the committee were always, it evolves. We've had 1 or 2 very, very eminent philatelists. We've lost a couple in the last few years. I mean, Patrick Pearson died last year. Jane Mowbray, a very, very long time member of the committee, and one of the great philatelists, let alone one of the great lady philatelists, retired from the committee. And we have 3 new members in Simon Richards, in Brian Trotter, and most recently Tim Harrison, who have been putting a lot of time into it. The business operates, it is a limited company. Its one shareholder is the Royal Philatelic Society London. we have roughly 9 every 5 or 6 weeks. We have a meeting, and we do probably 2,500 patients during the year, so something of 250, which is not a record. We were looking back the other day, and we actually find that if you go back about 40 years, we were looking at something over twice that number. But this was actually the time when the Gibbons specialized catalogue was coming out, and I think everybody was checking their shades. And so there was a sort of an unreal blip in terms of numbers. The history, I think probably the trigger, and it never really dawned on me until I was doing these slides actually. I've known for a very long time that one of the members of the Royal Philatelic Society had been approached by Julian Sarpi, the forger, at a sale. And what's in blue up there, give our compliments to Mr. Castle and thank him for his article on the Sydney views. We have had the plate altered and they're all right now. Well, we do actually have the Sydney View plate in our archives, and which was engraved by George Kirk Jeffreys, and the stamps were sold by Alfred Benjamin and Julian Sarpi. In fact, it was such a good seller that Benjamin lived in a house that was called Sydney View. They operated out of the City of London, and these are very, very good forgeries indeed. And almost certainly what Sarpi was talking about was the left ones were the original engraving without the clouds, and the right ones are the same stamps re-engraved with the clouds. And so in many ways, this may have been the trigger for the formation originally of the expert committee. These still appear on the back of auction catalogues, illustrated as genuine. They're very deceptive. One pretty easy way of looking of telling though is to look at the little star at the top. If it's to the right of the T, as you see there, then it's the forgery. If it's straight under the T, then it's probably genuine. So the Council of the Royal issued an instruction to form the expert committee. The original members were Messrs. Castle, Bacon and Evans, 3 of the greats of their time. I was looking the other day that since the start, we've probably had no more than, well, it's about 50 members, something like that. I think we're up to about 50 now. So we have photographic records going back to the very beginning. MP Castle was very clear that they would take photographs of everything that they saw. And we have photographic records going back to the 19th century. And we're something over 230,000 certificates over that period. It's very labor intensive, and I must say, as important in terms of the running of the show are the helpers who do the sorting work, the writing of the certificates, all the other work that goes with it, the checking of the photographs and the taking of the photographs. And this is all managed by Lucy Caulfield, who is runs it extremely efficiently. And recently, Lucy is doing less than a full day every day now, and we have an assistant to her called Tracy Coleman, who is available during the times that Lucy it overlaps with Lucy and times when she isn't there. And so these are our premises. Those are the main records, which are the photographic records, and behind them the forgery records. There's a double bank, as you will see from there. There's a double bank of sliding shelves. The one on the right looks like it's about to fall over. It's actually straight upright. I don't know, the photograph's a bit wonky, so I can assure you it's perfectly upright. In terms of numbers of these, we've got each one of those bookshelves takes about 120 albums, something like that, six times 20. So, and so we've got a bank of 4 at the back and 3 at the front, and so you're looking at a very large amount of material there. One of the things we're doing, these are our only records currently. Quite honestly, we use them all the time in terms of one of the first things we do when we get a new patient is to check whether we've seen it before. And therefore the photographic records are constantly being looked at. The forgery and other records are most important in analyzing a lot of the stamps. And we have been looking to back up these for some time. We have been extremely lucky to have been given a donation towards a new VSC when we updated it to the 8000. And that same generous individual has said, tell me what you need in order to back up your records. And so we're looking at scanning the whole of our photographic records and the whole of the worksheets, because obviously when we're looking at an item, you're writing down views, and so we know what the individual members of the committee thought, and they're in boxes which are taking up a lot of room and could easily be scanned into a more manageable format. We're about to begin this. We're first getting quotes from outside companies to see what happens there. There's a fair amount of work and a fair amount of management, because actually a lot of those albums, there is quite a lot of overlap of photographs. So if we get lots of covers, we don't put one per page. Otherwise we'd have run out of room ages ago. We put 3 or 4 on a page and they're overlapped. And so there's a bit of remounting to do before we can actually scan something like that. And initially the scanning will obviously just show the numbers. The numbers are on the photograph. We then have to think, well, how do we make this manageable and usable in terms of seeking an individual certificate number, seeking, a penny black lettered HF, and to get to a stage that is going to be an immense amount of work to get to that stage. But initially, the first target is, let's have a backup record of what we do have. These we call the Big Red albums, which are they're wonderful albums. They're made by Goodmans of Birmingham, who together with Frank Godden were the 2 great album makers, and they have got all sorts of interesting information gathered over the years. And for instance, here we are, if we're looking at the Seychelles surcharges, the 12-cent surcharges of the 1890s. We've got settings of those surcharges. That's the same thing, one with the stamps blotted out just to see the surcharge on its own, and that sort of information is in our study archives, if you like, our research archives, which we constantly refer to. The committee itself at work, Lucy bottom left, and Tracy, our new assistant on that, and those are the majority of the committee there. We were missing Stephen Holder and Brian Trotter, and I'm behind the camera. So, and this is a typical meeting day. The point is, all the committee sees every item, and it's very interesting. You can be studying something and somebody picks up something completely different, and it's to have several sets of eyes looking at it. It always staggers me how easy it is to miss something if you're going down a particular line of thought, and to have the whole group of people there is a big plus. We occasionally have open days. This was London 2022, and Tim Harrison holding forth to some visitors there. We kept going through the whole of COVID. We had people coming in virtually every day, other than when it was absolutely banned in everywhere but Lime Street, but in number 10, I think everybody else took it. But anyway, so that we kept pretty much going with a sort of skeleton staff, if you like. The committee itself was a skeleton of 3 or 4 people, but we managed to keep keep going without too big a dip in numbers and provide the service we're trying to provide. As I mentioned, the certification process probably takes 6 to 8 weeks. What I would ask, if you're sending something to us, don't please send it in the week before the meeting. There's a lot of research that goes on prior to the meeting. So actually, if you can do it sooner than that, it doesn't half help us, because there is, we check our records, we check the photographic records, we do quite a lot of research, we check the books, and so there's a lot of sort of basic information that gets done ahead of the actual meeting day itself. Isn't always completed on the meeting day. Some of them we need to do further checking. We use consultants quite a lot, and they assist on specialist areas, which I'll just cover in a second on that. So those are current costings. As a member of the Royal, you get two at a 50% discount your first 2 of the year, and you generally receive a 25% discount for collector members, that is. PTS members a 10% discount, and the vast majority of come within that 1400 minimum value, so it's 35 to 40 pounds for plus VAT, of course. I'm afraid we've got to do that. And those are the meeting dates for the rest of this year. Some people say, I just want to tell you if it's genuine or not. I do not want you to tell me whether it's torn. I do not want to tell you whether it's faded, etc. Sorry, if you send it to us, we give you the full things that we think are needed for the description of it. So we're not just going to say half the story. You will get the whole story. So the certificates themselves, one of these on the left is in fact when the Queen sold up some of her stamps in 2001, and so you see the keeper of the Privy Purse, and that a single certificate, which means it's genuine, and the multiple certificates, minimum of 4. On the right is a right old dog of a Salon tenpenny, which has been completely rebuilt. I bought it as a completely rebuilt stamp, and it's quite useful and interesting, I think, to have some records of these. So from time to time we'll sort of record it as useful examples. So this one comes out of my own, what I call my caveat emptor collection. The tradition of signatures, sometimes people are surprised that, if you like, the genuine one only has a single signature. This is the way it was planned in 1894, and we haven't really seen any particular reason for changing it since. So you know, whether you like it or not, I think it probably carry on like that. Certain things, we have a sort of methodology. We do not sit down and plate line engraved stamps of GB. We send them to a specialist for this, and ditto the departmental overprints, the official overprints, which are one of the most difficult subjects. Certainly all the rarer items and the more difficult overprints like OW. I reckon probably of the OW officials, even some of the supposedly common ones, you're probably looking at about somewhere between 90 and 95% duds. IR official, probably okay. Government parcels, a lot of faked overprints, and some of these really you can only tell by being able to plate them. I would certainly not recommend buying a rare departmental overprint with any certificate from any of the foreign expertisers. They do not know. They some of these forgeries are exceedingly good and easy to fool people. We did one for one of the American ones the other day, which they had originally given a good certificate, and we said absolutely no way, it isn't. But anyway, We have our own reference collection of the shades of GB from the Jubilee through to end of King George V's reign. And this is one of the sort of master references that link to the catalogue. And it was put together originally in the 1960s by Ron Lee and Frank Stott, who were the people who really drove the descriptions and the collecting of shades of this. And so we have that reference. We have a donated collection, which is probably the one we use more than any of our donated collections in the society. And this was a gentleman called James Cummings. I don't think any of us knew him. He came from Northern Ireland, and he left us an estate of his mostly modern GB and a few other countries as well. And we use it all the time because he's got things like traffic light cylinder blocks of the commemoratives and the definitives of the period. A basic straight through collection, not the great rarities, but my goodness, it isn't half helpful if you're looking for a missing color when you've got a block of 6 of the proper one in front of you. One of the other unexpected collections maybe is the UPU distribution. King George V always got examples of the UPU distributions. He didn't collect foreign, and therefore he passed the foreign on to the Royal Philatelic Society and its expert committee, and kept examples of the British Empire and Commonwealth, or Empire in his day. And so we have a pretty good showing, not complete because I don't think all the distributions were perfect, and they tended to sort of stop in about the 1990s. But for much of the 20th century, we have the ones distributed by the UPU, which basically you can guarantee as being genuine. Obviously, we have photographic collections. We have a big forgery collection, and which is often useful, particularly for some of the foreign countries where maybe we're not as familiar on a day-by-day basis. And we have, like the big red albums, we have references for all sorts of things. The Royal itself, of course, has some wonderful collections. I mean, E.W. Man Natal is better than any in the world. The Louis Bradbury Bahamas, ditto. King George V proofs of Henry Adams is that, plus the Royal Philatelic collection basically has got everything that exists, I think, within the King George V proofs in terms of the different varieties. It was in the days when people didn't really collect it, and so it was given to us as a somewhat sort of secondary stuff that nobody really wants this, so why don't I give it to you? Theodore Groom Hermes heads, he was one of the great students of his time, known for probably more groundbreaking discoveries than any other single collector of his period. And of course, we get access to the various major collections like the Tapling, like the Postal Museum. The Royal Philatelic collection is rather more difficult to access at the moment. We can get items from it on a sort of one-by-one basis, but currently it's in the basement of Buckingham Palace, and Buckingham Palace is being refurbished. And so to keep it safe and keep it from getting too much dust on it, it doesn't come out very often. So, and we ask others, so some of it just to confirm our own views, others where there is a high level of expertise. I would think of something like, I don't know, Japanese overprints on Far East, Japanese occupation overprints, things like that, where we would probably ask a consultant on that. And they're very helpful. And this is members of the trade, it's auctioneers, it's collectors as well. And they're very important in terms of provenance. We've had a lot recently, we've had a lot of Chinese material, and we have a couple of very well informed people within the Chinese market who assist us in looking at covers They seem to know who is forging them. They know the traits for the forgeries, and some of them extremely good indeed. And so you need all the help you can get and things like that. Equipment, all the standard stuff, obviously, which is probably among the most important. VSC, which is a much updated model from the original one and is significantly better, much higher magnification, a range of light sources, things like the platform where you put the stamp can be altered. It's not altered by hand now. It's driven. It's a driven platform, so you can it's a motorized platform. So there's a lot of things you can do now that you couldn't before, and I'm just going to take you through some of the things that it can do. But it isn't the answer to everything. I mean, people seem to think that it can tell all the different shades, etc. No, it's looking at things with better eyes than you are, and you know how difficult it is to tell whether the difference between the blue green, the green, and the yellow green in many instances, and it has exactly the same difficulties, and it is not good on black. A carbon, an organic color, and of course most postmarks are on black, so it can tell a certain amount, but not as much as one would have loved to have had. It's a lot better on blue postmarks, red postmarks, yellow postmarks, etc. than that. So that's the background. Might show you some of the items themselves. So that is the VSC, looking at the block of 4 of the Van Diemen's Land, and showing the hood on the left of where it's sitting there on the platform. There it is in a bit more detail. So this is normal light, just looking at it with a spotlight on it. So that one there is looking at it as a side light. You can tell it's an engraved stamp. You can see the ripples of the surface of that. And what are we looking for here? Basically, these stamps were able to be used fiscally from October 1863. And this series was valid right through that period. And so the likelihood is what is an unused block, it looks here, is going to be actually fiscally used. So there we are, can't actually see any scratches of pen marks or anything on that. So, okay, let's look a bit more. That's looking on the back, showing the watermark, which is a numeral watermark, 1 for 1 penny. And the one where you would expect to find something is this, really, where under ultraviolet, it'll go through a range of ultraviolet lights or the machine will take it through from infrared through to ultraviolet. That is picking the 365 nanometer. And no sign of any manuscript obliteration. So maybe it's genuine. I happen to own this one, and I would be rather pleased at that because I bought it as though it's fiscally used. And so maybe it isn't. This one I also bought at the same time, which is the 4-penny. Now that does look a bit scrubbed, but then of course the printing of that period was a bit blotchy quite a lot of the time. It was done in Hobart, and so it's not brilliant printing. And so you may say that's an unused stamp that's had a bit of wear and tear until you look at it under 365, and there you are. You can actually read the date on it. So that is a manuscript fiscal use of that stamp. That there is a strange one, because this is manuscript use, but it's not fiscal use. This is a much earlier stamp, 1856. It's the first local print of the 4-penny, probably the largest known block. And it's got, if you look at it carefully, it's got 58. And so a lot of the smaller post offices did not have their own hand stamps. So what do? They had a number by that stage, and so they put it on the stamp on that. And now a lot of those have been cleaned to make them unused, and so you've actually cleaned what is a very important item, which would be worth a lot more had it got its postal manuscript cancel there. If you got, it's for some reason Gibbons lists these high values. Almost all of them are revenue usages, but they're in the catalogue. They must say those postmarks do not look very convincing to me. And the 50 rupee is probably not known postally used. So there we are. That proves it. It had a purple fiscal cancellation. So quite a nice stamp as a revenue stamp. Pity you put the fake postmarks on. So that's a cleaned fiscal stamp with fake postmarks. This is demonstrating the sidelight, and it's wonderful for looking at for embossed stamps. These are a very interesting, or the one on the right is a very interesting item, because it's marked counterfeit and signed by Thomas Major, who was the engraver to the Mint, Royal Mint at the last half of the 18th century. Now, to forge these was a very serious offence indeed. You were forging a revenue stamp, and the revenue stamps were they took far stronger view of somebody forging a revenue stamp, therefore defrauding the government, as doing something that was just to the other citizens. So if they found who had done this, it was death. It was a capital offence. And and the one on the right, so to find it actually marked by Thomas and signed by Thomas Major as counterfeit is was a great find. It comes from my collection, and I bought it at Spink in a lot of receipts, and within the receipts there were in fact 2 of these very interesting counterfeits, extremely rare. For obvious reasons, if you were head chopped or you were hung, drawn and quartered, then you probably didn't make very many of them. Backlighting, not always easy to see watermarks. This is quite an obvious one. This is the second watermark of the Australian kangaroos, the watermark of the First World War period, 1916, showing that very nicely, the narrow crown and A. This was a fun one. It was quite a rare stamp, the penny red brown imperf used in Malta. It does exist. It would be quite late usage, but it does exist. A25. So what do we do on this? Well, let's look at the date impression books for a start. So the lower left ones are 1859, so that would be the period on that. It's not one of the duplexes, almost certainly, because that's a bit later. So that we have transparencies of all of these, and so we can compare as needed. So we're looking at a comparison. You probably don't need to go much further than that, because obviously the shapes are completely wrong. However, what we can do is take those and overlay one on the other one. I can't really show it in a fixed PowerPoint display, but we can actually strobe between one impression and the other impression to see whether they move. And so you can go flash, 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 flash on the 2 impressions, but you can see quite clearly there that the bars don't work and the lettering is rather different. So I'm sorry, not used in Malta at all. It's a fake postmark. So that was a demonstration of the VSC. I thought it'd be interesting to run through one or two of the other bits and pieces we have. This is fairly random, and so just ones that I thought were particularly interesting. Some forgeries are pretty obvious. The £5 Cyprus, you see quite a lot of these. Less usual to see a complete sheet, but they're pretty modern and they're pretty awful. Ditto the 1856 issue of, no, sorry, the 1861 issue of Mexico. which is the four reales on yellow paper. Doesn't look right at all. That's in a typical format that are normally called Spiro, sheets of 25. Whether they were made by Spiro or sold by Spiro, or their 25 was done by several people and just and they're all called Spiro, I don't know. But Wolfgang Maassen is currently doing a book on these, and we've given him several hundred scans of what we've got of this. And the basic thing, the basic sort of outcome does seem to be that Spiro were less active for a shorter period than most people have identified them as being so. Now that's a pretty hairy cover. This is a 40,000 line cover with a single stamp on. It's a sort of middle local Geneva issue, not the first ones, but the sort of second, third set. Rather frustratingly, you can't actually tell a year date, but there's obvious reasons why that might be the case. The basic cover, I think the address is probably okay. Whether that hand stamp on the left is correct, I don't know, but it could be. Rather conveniently, it was signed on the back by Jean de Sperati. So what we're looking at there is a Sperati cover, or the stamps were forgeries by Sperati and put on the cover. And if you look on the back, you've got copy behind the stamps, and if you look carefully, you've got copy as well on the stamps on the front as well. And so these are that little hand stamp was in fact put on at Chambéry. Sperati got prosecuted for exporting currency, exporting valuables from France after the war, and these were obviously part of the evidence used against him. I thought this was rather fun. We have I'd shown you the Jeffreys Sydney views. Well, this is another part of Jeffreys' work. This was his Grenada revenue stamp, and we have the complete set of plates downstairs at the Royal. They were given to us via David Boyd, and they're the Robert Clarkson bequest. Robert Clarkson owned a couple of stamp dealers, including Benton, Bull and Cooper, and he came across these. And these were found, I think, in the basement of number 1 Cullum Street, which is a shop owned by Benjamin and Sarpy, which is now Boots the Chemist, actually. And they had been scudding about and eventually came to us in the 80s. And this is a print which I had taken from the original plate of the forgery in black, and an example of what the issued stamp looks like on that, printed in orange with an overprint. Well, here we are. If you were putting together a forgery, you've got your plate, so you take a print of it. So that's a nice print. You leave the margins because you're going to cut those down, and it looks like it's a perfectly genuine stamp, because you can see that it was attached to a stamp next door as well. A typical trait of a Jeffreys forgery. You need a watermark. So you've got some watermark paper. In fact, we have a complete sheet of this watermark paper in the archives of the expert committee. Slightly misshapen stamp. The watermarks rather. The top and bottom should be a bit longer compared with the side ones. It's a bit squat, but it passes. You need it perforated because these were never issued imperforate. So you'd have your own little perforating implement for that. And so here you are, and you can, so you need the overprint. And this again is from the Jeffreys implement which we have downstairs. If you were making a pound stamp, they also made a £2 and a £5 one. Because the stamp, the Queen's face isn't quite right, it's probably better to have it used. So you have your own do-it-yourself forgery kit. So here you are, you can have a straight line Grenada, you can have a curved Grenada, and you can put various dates in according to those little flat plugs there. And and your outcome would be that. So these are the Jeffreys forgeries of the Grenada revenue stamp. This was the one he was always worried about, because even in 1890s, forging a revenue stamp was a much more serious crime than forging a postage stamp. And Jeffreys was always worried about what he called his Grenadas. He also did some overprints on genuine stamps. That's the 1883 postage overprint. And one is genuine, the other one's forgery. He wasn't very good on this one because he forgot the full stop. The genuine one is the one with the full stop. So not his best work. He's normally more accurate than that. This is the other, when they started running out of penny stamps with postage on them, they put postage on twice and chopped them in half. They were still a penny each, but they had twice as many of them. And so that again is out of the Jeffreys archive. And that is a forgery on the left and a genuine one on the right on that. If the overprint looks very black and very definite, then it is very definitely a forgery. If it doesn't look so definite. One of the other ones on here is that the left stamps you'll see are clean cut perforations, and the ones on the right are the rough perforations. Well, all the genuine should be on the rough perforation. This is a somewhat notorious or famous stamp. It's variously identified as a proof, as an essay, as a reprint, as all sorts of things. Harold Fisher had one in his collection, which had a genuine certificate from somebody. I don't know whether, I haven't checked whether it was us. But when you compare it with the same in an engraved stamp, you can see it looks a lot flatter. It's obviously been done photographically from an original, but it's a lithograph stamp. It isn't an engraved stamp. And actually, it was first listed in December 1908 by Charles Nissen, and so it's been known about for a very long time. There is, in fact, if you wanted one of these, there is a dealer advertising it currently, but advertising it as a proof and at a price which reflects it being a genuine proof rather than being a forgery. So reprints can be a pain because many of them like this are done from the original plates. This is the Nevis, so you've got a plate proof in black, very nice. Of the shilling value, even on the third stamp on the third row, you've even got the cross on the hill. So obviously from the original plant and engraved stamp from the original plate, perfect. Not, however, a proof. These were reprints done, in fact, by the Royal Philatelic Society in 1931 when the plates were owned by Louis Bradbury, and a series of sheets was done, and they pop up every now and again, and so they're marked on the back, which helps, but they're very pretty. Here, probably a little more difficult. These are the wood blocks. If you look very carefully on the blue one in particular, you can see that vertical line down the middle, a very, very light vertical line, very easily painted out to form an original. And they were done by Jurgens, who is now known as a forger of Cape of Good Hope. But at the time was one of the doyens of Cape collectors. When you see them in black, it's a lot easier to see those lines down the middle on that. And in fact, they were told off by that, and they were told to go do a proper job. So so we don't have this potential problem on that. And so Jurgens, in fact, there was one of the few philatelic libel cases involved Robson Lowe and Jurgens. Robson Lowe accused Jurgens of forging stamps and was sued by Jurgens. And I think won. I haven't sort of traced the story, but anyway, that was, but these were done by permission, with permission by Jurgens. Funny enough, only this last meeting we had one of these, which was the reprint of the many reprints of early India. They are on very thin paper, therefore in that state are quite easily told from the originals, which are on much thicker paper. However, if you start with a good impression of something on thin paper, you can probably find a nice bit of something to stick it on and you get a pretty good impression. Put a nasty postmark on it and you could do a pretty good job of fooling a lot of people on that. So but we have collections of these reprints based on the Spence book on them. And this is another one which is it's one of the essay heads. According to Spence, he reckons it's the 1850s. I must say, I think highly unlikely. Hausberg was in India in the 1890s, and I think most of these were done at his instigation. And so I think a lot of them are in fact not the 1850s. I put this in for a reason of just sort of, I suppose, caveat emptor. This is a perfectly good, genuine, completely original letter from Mauritius to Bordeaux. You can see packet letter Mauritius, you've got an 8 decimal charge, you've got a routing mark Barcelona Marseille, nothing wrong with it at all. Look at that nice little square in the top right corner where you could stick a nice Mauritius stamp. A lot of these covers have indeed, and the date of this is 1857, so there was still a lot of the cruder Mauritius stamps around at the time. You stick a penny postpaid or something like that, or a Dardenne or something in there, and you have touch up the postmark onto the cover, and you have multiplied the value of this by a considerable amount. So just sort of remember that. Just, you can get things. This was perfectly good without a stamp on, and I should think many of them that were like this have now got stamps on. Modern stamps are more difficult to tell with things like paper. If you're forging a penny black, your problem isn't so much the design, it's the paper. If you're forging something modern like this, you can probably find the paper, and these were done by the from the original dies or plates, and so they are exactly matching the issued stamp but in different colors, and they come from a miniature sheet. Quick run through a couple more. Penny black with blue Maltese cross under UV from backlight. That shape of that cross doesn't look right. It's very odd shape. The top left whirl and the bottom left whirl, really, those almost always match one another. You look at it like that and you can clearly see the red Maltese cross tucked in behind across the Queen's face. So the whole of the blue Maltese cross is faked. That's under UV again. And New Zealand, a very fine example of the Dunedin line perf on the threepenny brown lilac, 1863 brown lilac, unusually well centered and well perforated. Something not quite right when you look at the back. That left side looks a bit funny somehow. And if when you look at it and if your eye's good on color, you'll see actually the whole of that vertical side, the color purple of there is different from the brown like elsewhere. It's all been painted. It's been added margin and painted in. India, perfectly reasonable possible cover in there, used in the Bombay Circle. So nothing particularly unusual. The rate is right. It's slightly late date because the stamps are 1854 and these postmarks didn't come in until 1859. And when you start looking at it like that, then you see how the obliteration has been touched up. It's perfectly all right on the stamp, but the bit on the cover has been penciled or inked over to tie it to the cover, so does not belong on the cover. A warning: pretty ordinary looking first day cover. Yep, it's in a polyester pocket. When you peel away the polyester pocket, a warning not to keep your covers in polyester pockets. It is particularly damaging to, well, as you can see, those gold heads on that. And lastly, I said we'd end up with some modern postal forgeries here. Quite honestly, you look at those and so you say, can you tell the difference? Right, well, maybe one's got phosphorlines and the other one hasn't. Well, looking at under UV, they're definitely different. Those are the second green ones on the left. They're definitely different, but you've got what look like phosphorlines on both of them. The backing paper reflects slightly differently. When you actually switch off the phosphor, however, there is no afterglow. So it's a sort of painted in line. It's not really a proper phosphorescence on that. But look at those enlargements, incredibly good. You need to be able to tell your lithographic printing from your photogravure printing to be absolutely certain of this. Very, very deceptive indeed. They're mass produced in China. They used to be made in a lot of them in Ukraine as well, but doesn't seem to be so many coming out of Ukraine recently. But if you look, you can even read which Chinese company is making these. So, and they arrived with me in an envelope, which I was rather intrigued as to which were bad and which were good on the envelope. And actually, I think what happened is they put enough of the good ones on to get it through the post without having to pay the full postage by using their own duds. And so, so basically the ones on the left are bad, and the second large is bad, and the rest, the two left of the red ones and the blue, the purple first is okay. So that the main way of telling the firsts, the purple first, is the genuine ones. The barcode is sort of bubbly, and which isn't true of all the other values, but certainly that one, it's very bubbly. And so it's like thermographic, if you like, thermographic printing, whilst it's flat on the lithographed forgeries on that. So there we go. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chris. And you ask any questions. The good news is we have some. So the first one comes to you from James Podger. He would like to know if someone has an item with a certificate number, but does not have the certificate because it's been lost or mislaid, how does one go about getting a copy of the original certificate?
We do not have a copy of the original certificate. Our records don't work in that way. We have a worksheet and we have a photograph, and you get the only copy of a certificate that exists. So fundamentally, you need to send it back to us to look at it again. Of course, the other thing, of course, is when the certificate was issued, the stamp might be very different today to when we last saw it. Now, quite honestly, if you say, you know, you sent us one last week and sorry I've mislaid it, we would probably give it a new number and give you and update it without having to look again. But I mean, you know, generally our system does not have a duplicate, so we cannot give you one.
Okay, thank you. Next question comes from one of our fellows in India, Abhishek Buwalka. Abhishek asks you, how much more easy or difficult is it to certify postal history items, especially stampless ones?
I think it depends on which country. There is a lot of knowledge of quite a lot of countries. Postal history, I suppose what happens with a postal history item is different. I mean, if you say postal history is, here's a cover, was this the same stamp on it as it was in 1860? That means that that's one of the things that probably challenges us more than almost any other. Does the stamp belong? I'll tell you a story. Peter Langmead, whose telegraph collection is now in the British Library, got on very well with Charles Nissen, whose shop was in Buckingham Palace Road. And Peter told me the story that he was in the Nissen's shop, and sitting on top of one of the cupboards was a flower press. So a little thing where you'd press your flowers between two bits of blotting paper, screw down the screws on the press, and you'd end up with a dried flower. And he said, what do you use that for? He said, well, we got lots and lots, we buy lots of waste paper, like sort of covers and things that have not got stamps on them because people have taken them off. And we also, as you know, have thousands of, I don't know, penny blacks and things like that. And if we've got a spare morning and nothing much else to do, we see whether we can match up the penny black postmark to one of our covers, because then we can sell it for 7 and 6pence as opposed to 2 shillings and 6pence. And this was for commercial reasons, they did that. But if you get a situation where the fact that this is the earliest known use of plate 8, you have to be damn sure that that particular plate 8 was on that particular cover, and actually the dates work. It could have been just one of Nissen's ones that that roughly fits, the colour's about right, the shape of the cross is about right, let's stick it on there and get our 7 and 6pence. So postal history has different sort of challenges, and we will often, if it's beyond our area, we will often use consultants on that.
Okay, thank you. You showed us the fee structure, and when you did, Abhishek followed up with another question. He asks, why was the 2 fees per year for members, why was that removed? He expresses the opinion that this has meant that many members have stopped using the expertisation services of the Royal.
In some ways, he's explained it, that actually there was just too many people sending very expensive items. Equally, there were quite a number of people who obviously shared 2 things round to all their friends, who all sent them in, and they were always the expensive items. And actually, we decided actually the balance, particularly after COVID, where whilst we'd kept operating, we were obviously financially a lot less positive, and so we thought it was probably a better balance of expertise versus cost.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mike Roberts has asked a question. He says, given that some people collect forgeries, do you give certificates on the attribution of genuine forgeries?
We do for certain. Is a Sperati forgery is one that we will certainly do. I think we would probably say is a Jeffreys forgery, because they are exceptionally good. Generally, we would attribute, if you like, probably not as a part of the main body of the certificate. And we definitely don't definitely don't identify certain PSNC ones. Just in case you wanted to know.
Oh, of course I did, yes.
All right.
It is a young forgery you would not get on a certificate, I'm afraid.
Okay. Keith Burton would like to know what proportion of material submitted are forgeries? Does it vary from country to country or particular periods?
I think it depends on forgeries. If you just think good or bad, in other words, one signature or more than one signature, then the majority, probably 80% are good, often with some sort of qualification. I mean, for instance, if you go to the Green Foundation in Canada and you send them a, I don't know, Nova Scotia one that has been regummed, they will give you a bad. We would say, if it's a perfectly good stamp, we say it's good but regummed. Yeah. So if you like, it's a qualified good, or is good but has condition isn't top quality, something like that. So on that basis, we probably less than 20% is actually gets a multi-signature.
Okay. But you're not really able to provide a breakdown by cut, because you asked.
Oh, country-wise, we probably get more bads from a lot of bads from the Chinese area, quite a lot of bads from the Indian area, quite a lot of bads from South American area, and so I think that's probably about if you look at something like GB, we get quite a few things that don't belong to the cover. That's probably one of the commonest ones. So this cover did have a penny black on, but it's not the penny black that's now on it. No, it's I'm not sure there's any sort of an absolute division between individual countries. No, that's about as good as I can do on that, I think. So
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Tony Plum would like to know a little bit more. He says, when you're sidelighting, and backlighting, once your analysis has been undertaken, are copies of the images retained in the RPSL records?
yes. One of the things I didn't mention, I probably should have done, is if you remember those two embossed stamps with the side light, if you saw the little strip down the bottom, it actually identifies the light at which that image was made. So it's repeatable from that point of view. And so we have a set of parameters, so that if you wanted to repeat what I did, to a similar one last time, we could repeat it again. Yes, those images are stored. Sometimes if somebody's doing a particular study, we might send them copies of the images as well. So
okay. Peter Mora asks the following question, Chris. He says, could you test modern overprints on definitives from Sharjah or Ras Al Khaimah? They will not have been in the UPU distributions. Peter says that he sees too many that might be modern forgeries.
Difficult, very difficult. We have eyes and ears in that part of the world, but of course a lot of those were done by Forum and people like that, who actually specialized in not only making sort of ordinary ones, but also exciting examples of inverted centers and miscolors and etc. etc. So there are all sorts of things going on in some of those areas that are make it very difficult indeed. And we reserve the right to say, sorry, we can't do this. And some of those modern areas in particular, you just say, I don't think anybody knows enough to know whether this was ever issued through the post office, or whether this came out the back door of the printer, or was done on purpose by the printer. There's many different things going on like that. So
okay. Lillian Swift would like to know, has anyone ever forged a certificate issued by the expert?
yeah, regularly we see some of the most bizarre ones. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Simon Martin Redman asks, why would a forger of old forge stamps of very little value, such as changing duty plates, etc.?
It's always been a bit of a puzzle. What I can say is I think that I think that probably quite a lot of these ones, it was more difficult to find a sort of selection of the same stamp of different values, and therefore so maybe there was a need, but I think often there was, well, quite honestly, if we are forging 6 out of the 7 values, and we might as well do a halfpenny as well, and so, but because it looks nice in the set, and therefore, if you like, you know, if you were making a little sheetlet of 25 of them, like a Spiro would, why wouldn't you do all values? Basically, you've got it set up there, and you put, it's a lithographic stone, and you put in a different value for, and then print off some and put another value in and print off some more, etc. Yeah, it's probably as easy as sort of hunting around, you know, in a packet to find something that fits because it's common.
Okay, thank you, Chris. That was the final question that I see here. So, Mike, over to you.
Thank you, and well done, Chris. Thank you very much. As I anticipated, you had a very interesting audience, which resulted in a number of questions. In fact, more questions than we've had so far on anything this year. But thank you for explaining who's involved and how the committee works, and in particular, your work on the updating and scanning of important records, which I think going forward is going to be very important. Thank you for the explanation of the new VSC 8000 and for the many interesting examples that you put before us. But I want to make the point again that I made at the beginning, that the members of the committee, members of your committee, make a huge voluntary contribution to our society as a whole, and I want to thank them all. So again, thank you all to members of the expert committee. So I'm now going to hand over to Peter, who I think will give you a virtual certificate.
Hello and good afternoon, everybody. I don't know how there's the number of participants is reducing. That's because I've come on. But Chris, wonderful afternoon. A number of things that I didn't know, and I'm sure that's the case for many people. I certainly heartily endorse the comments that Mike has made about the contributions that the expert committee and their helpers, volunteers and the staff have made over the years, and indeed do so day by day. It's an amazing contribution to the Royal, and I just hope that everybody enjoys it. your knowledge is encyclopedic. And I think the most wonderful thing that we've learned today is that you have a great way of communicating that. Lastly, I'm so pleased that you have asked for volunteers to help us doing the scanning and sorting all those things out, preparing for scanning and those sort of things. We want to start as soon as possible. So if there's anybody on this call who has an interest in this, do please get in touch. Finally, some of the material which you quoted as being available to you was some of it was new to me, and I'm so glad that you've highlighted some of the things that the Royal has at their disposal, particularly the expert committee with these not just the photographs and the records, but other sources of information and used for comparison purposes. So thank you very much for that. I hope it won't be long before we can get back to the Royal Philatelic collection, which has always been a huge boost to the expert committee and to everybody involved in philately in general. So thank you very, very much indeed. It's a great delight for me to present you with a certificate. Normally it's the other way around. Normally you're giving me luncheon vouchers or large vermeils, as it's often called. I would give you great pleasure to give a certificate back to you, Chris, for your obviously good preparation and hard work. So Mark, I think you've got the certificate and we can present it to you electronically. It will come in real time in due course.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I hope you find that. I hope you find it interesting. I must say, it to me, the expert committee is a great one. You're involved in an important organisation, and you're playing with stamps.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Mike,
Yes.
if I may, can I just raise one more question with Chris, which came in very late, but it's an interesting one. I think we'd be interested in the answer. The question comes from Joan Harman, Chris, and she says, the standards for expertising, are they being coordinated between the various expertising agencies? Because there are differences in tools and how they are used. So what's your view on that in terms of the standards for expertising that are used by the various expertising agencies?
I think standards is a very, very difficult one to comment on. We talk to other expertising agencies, particularly in areas where they have specialist knowledge. I mean, we will talk to the BPA, who's our sort of, if you local other on that. On American material, we certainly have a very good relationship with the Foundation, Philatelic Foundation in New York. On major British North American stuff or complex British North American stuff, we would almost certainly go to the Vinnie Green Foundation as well. We deal also on things like New Zealand and Australia. We talk to people, either people who are members, or we talk to them officially as expertising bodies down in Australia and New Zealand as well. So there is cooperation among them. Now, standards, I mentioned one difference of standard, and that is, I mean, we would see, for instance, regumming as being a defect, but not a defect turning it from a good to a bad. As I understand it, that would not be the case in Canada. And so it's a hard one. There are also, I think, quite a lot of expert agencies where you won't get us all to agree on quite a few things, which does vex, particularly an auctioneer, where you know, they will get different opinions from different bodies, and that's not totally surprising, because some of this stuff is not an absolute judgment. We are giving an opinion. It is not a guarantee, and we may look at something differently. What we would say is that if something comes that somebody says, I don't think you're right on this, then we will always look at it again. You know, if somebody insists that we are completely wrong and we think we're completely right, we just won't come to an agreement. I mean, I suppose that most often happens probably on a plate 77 penny red, of which we get about 4 a year. And I can't remember the last time I've seen one that we were prepared to give a good certificate to. I don't think I've ever seen one that we're prepared to give a good certificate to.
All right.
But I mean, but that's most of the time optimism. But no, I mean, these things are often, they're not an absolute judgment. They are an opinion. And so particularly things like overprints. I mean, you know, Peter Coburn saw the other day, we had one where you know, the view, I think there was an American certificate that said it was all right, and we didn't think it was at all. And you know, we're pretty certain of that. We did look very hard. We did compare it with stuff in the Queen's collection, etc., and we concluded this didn't fit. Sorry. That doesn't, you know, it doesn't mean we were definitely right. It just means we weren't confident enough to say we were, that it was good.
Okay, thank you very much.